In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hey, I'm Jared.
And I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha. Welcome back, Greg. I'm glad you're able to record with me this week. I don't know what all you want to tell people or don't, but
we can take a sharing episode here after we get started and just generally review the overall health crisis that we went through, and the positive light that we saw in the week through the course of the crisis. And it was certainly a lot happening in our family. My wife got very ill, and we had to go and deal with that as best we could. And thankfully, everything is in a better space now. But that was where we were at, was dealing with a health crisis for my wife.
Yeah, well, and praise God, everything is basically headed in the right direction now. Nothing horrible resulted, and that's a huge blessing. I know for me, I was out of town. I went to a men's encounter, which it's a good thing to do. If you any of our listeners, if you haven't gone or if you don't know what it is, encounterministry.org. It's one of the better things I've done. The Holy Spirit is moving there, and you see a lot of positive fruit in long term in the lives of people who go there. And so it has been a good thing. And I was finally able to go again after a couple of years. It had been a couple of years. So that was a positive.
Yeah. All too often you find that your religious bent people will put that face on for what it offers them. And when we're there, we find that everyone is there for the long haul. They're there to be, uplifting themselves and everyone around them. They're not there for show.
Absolutely true. And the brothers that we have found through that, I still do their post thing weekly, and it helps me get through a lot of difficult places because it's brothers walking beside each other. It's a very good thing.
If you don't mind
so
that,
that's
tangent.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a topic. With the cover that you just did, this is a large grouping of hundreds of, in this particular event, it's for men. They do spouses together. They do women, and then they do kids. So they've got different groups that they will do. But this sort of gathering for like-minded or curious, faithful people, right, in that space. I saw something where the secularists are attacking any group, any gathering of religious people. And the one that I'd seen, they were doing monster trucks and rock and roll concerts and things in Jesus' name, right? And I was curious as a tangent, what your input on that might be. Just A, what business it is of anybody to say how another person worships. And B, is it just complaining from the secular side about anything, exalting Christ in any way?
It's one of those you'll know them by their fruit things where we see some of these things going on that are obviously they're billed as Christian events. They're supposedly Christian events. And there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on at some of them. Some of it is very secular, even to the point of being sexual or something. And just, you look at it and you go, well, that's not great fruit. That's not showing Christ's character. That means that's something to be if I'm looking to decide whether I'm going to involve myself in something like that, the answer is, no, I'm not. Um, as far as judging other people and how they worship, I don't care. People can do what they want. They answer to God, same as I do. But when I look at it, I do have to make decisions for myself and for my family about whether it's good to be involved in those things. And in the case of some of these, I would say definitely not. Where with Men's Encounter, the experience we've had, I was kind of questioning, doubtful when I went the first time, and it really changed my life. And I know you would say kind of the similar thing, that it was a positive thing for you. So the fruit of it has been good fruit in my life. It has definitely drawn me toward God. And the Holy Spirit is active there. You can tell when you're there if you're paying attention. And more importantly, you can tell from the fruit of the lives of the people who attend that as time goes on, they draw closer to God. They have cleaner, better, more more holy lives because they go there, and they that says that God is present there and He's working. And to me, that's what I look for. Well, that's why I
Certainly.
have such a
On
problem
the
with church in general. But go ahead.
Yeah, the big organization will fall prey to that. And the faults and the failures of the big organization is my worry with the big monster truck rally for Christ, is that I would love to have a place where the Andrew Clavens of the world can come out and say, I make popular media and I'm Christian, right? We don't have a good place for that. But it does open up a space for people to say, forgive my sins because I went to your party, right? So both
Yeah, I don't
exist.
know, man.
I think that on the overall side of showing a place, allowing a place where the popular voices, everyone from the guy that plays Superman to, the people that people look up to in the modern day, for them to say, oh yeah, I'm one of you, I'm a Christian. They can not want to hear that part of me. They can not advertise that side of me, but I wouldn't be able to do what I do without this influence, right? It is, um, core of who I am, and therefore it becomes an example overall. And it allows them to say, I did make a mistake. I did X, Y, Z in my youth. It wasn't the best way to live my life. And through Christ, I found a better way. The old me still existed. The new me is working hard every day, but I'm not perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah. You know, I think people see what they want to see a lot of times. It's like um, when we have media events, when we have stuff, you'll notice the ratings on things go down when they aren't getting people's attention. It's like the Oscars, the Golden Globes, whatever. Those media events have been absolutely viewership down in the toilet for years, and getting worse still because they're not doing something that there's any particular interest in. And when it comes to Christians in media, most people either don't care or they fall under the enemy's sway and they hate Christians who are in media. And so, Andrew Klavan, he does have places he goes and does that. It's like he speaks at Young Americans, I don't remember, I think it's YAF stuff. He speaks at those, he goes to colleges, he does various things where he talks about being a Christian, and he publishes books about his memoirs about the great good thing, and his how he came to Christ. He's done all of these things, and most people don't want to hear it or don't care, or they're already Christian, and so they just assume that everybody should be, and so why is this a big deal or whatever. The only people who actually seem to care are the people who are under the influence of the enemy, the woke crowd or whatever you want to call them, and the left in general, and they like to demonize people who are Christians because they're Christian. And we know to expect that. The Bible says that they hated me, they will hate you. Jesus said it. So, what can we say?
I suppose the appropriate scripture for it is that each individual will be held responsible. Just professing the name, just putting on the badge is not enough, or not even a check mark for you one way or the other. And so, in those spaces, being a good Christian in those spaces is still the only thing that matters, just like everything.
Well, being a good Christian anywhere, following Christ anywhere is the only thing that matters. Being a good Christian has the wrong connotations to me. It says like having good behavior and showing the right face to the world, and I don't care. Following Christ is what I care about. And Christ had a lot of things to say that people didn't want to hear. He wasn't what he had to say wasn't particularly welcome, and it was only a small percentage of people who heard him. And we know from the Bible that wide is the way and broad the path to destruction, and many will find it, and narrow is the way and straight that leads to life, and few will find it. So, I mean, it's not a case of lacking something so much as it's a case of this is the expected mode that things will operate in, because this is the way we know this is the way it was to be. And then there will come a time when things will change. Christ will return and he will set things right, but that hasn't happened yet. And so we've got this thing where we do our best to be salt and light and to make disciples of the nations. And when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, then the time of Jacob's trouble will come about. And I mean, that's scriptural, that's biblical, right? So,
Indeed.
hey, I have a cold here, so I'm periodically going to be like blowing my nose or whatever. I'll mute, but anyhow, I don't know what other thoughts do you have on this?
That was the takeaway that I had, was that the monster trucks for Jesus, or rock concert, large gatherings in whatever form they take, I would look for specific actors doing terrible things, right? You would never approve of drug usage in any place. You never approve of pedophilia in any place. It doesn't matter where, right? So good actions in the location is expected, or just because it's noted as a religious gathering doesn't mean to not keep your eyes out for those people that are uh, using it in a negative way to target people, right? So
By their
you'll
fruits
always
you'll know
find,
them.
right. So it's one of those. Bill Maher, is it the politically incorrect with Bill Maher? He points out that it's not that there are necessarily pedophiles in children's programming. It's just that there are pedophiles near children. And so, of course, where there's children, there's pedophiles, because otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? Not that everyone around children is a pedophile, but if you're a pedophile, you're likely to be found around children.
True, though I think in the children's programming thing, Bill Maher misses the fact that the enemy, the spiritual enemy of us all, is active and working um, to get to get his fingers in places where he can affect children, where he can affect, and so what better tools to put in that position than people who've already sold out to him in some great measure. So
Well,
I think that
there's a greater,
factor is there too.
yeah, there's a great focusing of the bullhorn whenever you do have Nickelodeon TV and Disney and a couple, three places where every child is being indoctrinated. If you can control those spaces and put forward the most insane children that you can make as the role model, that gives a lot of leverage for progressive pushes. Additionally, it is unnatural. It is unnatural to do anything other than observe very young children, right? You keep them safe, you observe, but you don't expect and train a child away from what they're doing naturally because you're kind of waiting to see what kind of person they're going to turn out to be. And where anytime you're in a competition, whether that's sports or TV or whatnot, you're going to be fighting to be better than pick a pick a metric, right? So you're going to be louder than the other kids, or more energetic than the other kids, or whatever it is that makes you more to the producer, which is going to cause like an incentive um, trap, an incentive trap. It's impossible to let them be.
Yeah, I mean there is some of that, and I understand what you're getting at here. I obviously my vision for this is sort of for my own kids, where I do not put them in front of the limelight. I do not put them in a spotlight. Intentionally, I don't, because it's not good for kids. That's a bad thing for kids. And so, if as a parent we're putting our kids in a spotlight, we're doing something that is not going to be a good thing for them. And so when with my own kids, when you say that, I think about, well, even at the youngest age, I do have to start correcting my own kids. They start doing things like my 1.5-year-old's hitting his big sister. He's like whack, whack, whack on purpose, trying to hurt her because he doesn't like what she's doing. Well, no, we don't do that. No, you don't do that. And then especially no big sister, you don't hit him back. But the point here is that I don't think of kids in a sort of a public context because my kids just would never be there because it seems absolutely insane to me to do that.
It
Or did
certainly
I
has
miss did
rather.
I miss what you were saying?
No, no, I think you caught on just right that those children are sadly abused in the position just because they're not able to just grow, and that is never going to be what God's intention was. It just doesn't feel right. So it is the young stardom. It is the young dress up. It is the pushing towards previous generations' adulthood for the next generation's childhood that is just evil. just yeah, it's a
Well,
sin.
it is. I
Sin.
mean, it is. Well, I don't know that I would necessarily go that far. The word sin is a difficult one to wrap around, but it isn't good for them, right? It doesn't have good effects. Being sinful is not the same thing, right? We know the Bible says everything is lawful for me, but not everything is good for me. Basically, that's a paraphrase, but that's Paul. And so we know that it's like I've known people who ended up putting their kids in a spotlight in some fashion, and I don't necessarily think it was sinful, but I do think that doing it at much of a level where it's more than just once or an occasional thing is bad for kids, and so it ends up causing bad results. I'm not going to go further than that.
Yeah, that's fair. Where I might compare it to is the difference between children that are in the school play where they're getting some exposure to things they might be curious about, and professional children that don't get to go to school and spend 16 hours a
Right.
day learning something that they might make a living out of, but is a living really a life. And they don't get a normal life because
Well,
of
or
that
even, yeah, if
kindness.
if your goal for your kids is that they make money for you, that's not a good thing. And for me, I performed in front of people when I was a kid. Sometimes we had these fine arts fairs where I would recite poetry, and then when I was a little older, I did poetry slams and stuff like that. So I don't see any problem with that. That's not what I'm speaking to. I'm saying sort of professionalizing, as you said, the exposure of your kids is not good for them.
Yeah. And you see
And
that
it's
with,
not good for us adults either, but
well, there's no expectation that a child could harm their parents by starving to death or any of the effects of the poor labor that you do put on a child like young Michael Jackson, young gosh, Shirley Temple is the one I'm thinking of, where these children are too young to they're not even out of diapers, and they are responsible for the livelihood of 50 people, right? Between the light crew and the sound crew and the band, and it's too much pressure for a child. And yeah, it's not fun learning at that point.
Well, and even then, I don't even think it's the pressure. I think it is the act of putting people in front of other people tends to cause them to be narcissistic and self focused. Because if you're saying, hey, look at this person, that is like amplifying that sort of ego thing that we each have. And it becomes really hard for anybody to withstand that. The only way I've ever seen people withstand it is like the late Michael Heiser went on like 370 or 380 podcasts a year. He was very much out in front of people. But in his mind, this was all for the glory of God. This was all for picking God up and teaching people something important about the Bible. And so when your purpose is outside of yourself and it's aimed at God, then that seems to mitigate some amount of that. It doesn't completely. There are plenty of people who wind up in the Joel Osteen position where they put themselves out in front of people as a prosperity message, and they wind up in the limelight, and then it raises them up into a position that ends up magnifying them instead of God, and that ends up being a bad thing. But the the bottom line is that the only way I know out to get out of that is to make it not be about yourself, and to keep a humble view of yourself. It's like there's this series of fiction books I read that talked about an old custom in Ethiopia. I don't know whether this is real or not, but the idea was the Akabe Tsetsen, the keeper of the fly whisks, whose sole purpose was to follow the king around and belittle and demean him when he started to get to be big in his own eyes, to help him to keep from having a swelled head. And if the king ever interfered with this person, he was instantly killed by his own guards. Now, this may just be a fictional concept, but the point here is that as human beings, we are very much liable to get a big head and to become arrogant, to become prideful. And the
There's a
only
gentleman,
way out of that is to keep a. Yeah, go ahead.
there's a gentleman that was a Roman king of some kind that was notable for writing books about Stoicism. Do you know
Okay, yeah, I
Constantinople?
know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
No,
that
no,
guy,
you're talking about what's his name? Oh, I
Stoicism.
can't remember the name now. Yeah, well,
But
you
his,
Google that, you'll find it immediately.
yeah, Stoicism from, doo, doo, doo. I see a bust of his head, but not a name.
Let's see.
So he did have a hired group. Marcus Aurelius was it, I believe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Aurelius. That's the
So
right one.
he did
Yeah.
have
What about him?
he, he did have naysayers, and the naysayers were those that were to keep him in his place. And in the idea of Stoicism, I believe that may have been where it originated prior to the Ethiopian. The Ethiopian, if it did arise, would have been because of their um, Christ faith that fermented in Ethiopia. That is one of the oldest Christian sects, right? So the Stoicism, all of that
It is.
comes from the same spirit.
Yeah, it
So
does.
the idea of
Well,
the
and
idea
the yeah, and it's one of those things where when we look at each other as brothers and I don't allow you or myself to like raise ourselves up above other people or see ourselves as somehow being better than other people. that's kind of the focus you have to keep, right? Because we're not. We're all the same. God made us
Right.
all.
Well, I wouldn't say same is exactly we're all built to our purpose, which is great. Um, but that ability to
No, you're right.
trust, you got to build the trust that I look up to you personally, right? I look up to Jared, and Jared knows things at a core level that I don't know on the core level. So if I have confusion, I'll go to Jared, and Jared's answer, I believe. I don't necessarily, right? He doesn't have a college degree in that thing I may ask about. He doesn't have life experience per se in that thing I'm asking about. But between us, I know that he can be my naysayer, look at things logically, spiritually, fully, and give me an answer that meshes with my worldview,
Right.
which all I can say is reality. And
Right.
to build those relationships before you have a question, so that when the question comes up, then you can listen to the naysayer, you can listen to another point of view. It's hard. You almost have to build it beforehand, and that usually comes from noticing something like awe, noticing that you look up to somebody in some area or another. That's how you recognize it.
Yeah, and right, and choosing the people who you trust very carefully is always important.
What do you think about segmented trust?
I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, bring it up here after the break. See you in a moment, guys.
Hey, everybody. The Kickstarter is funded, and looks like we're going to be getting another anthology of characters from Brightstar, which is, by the way, one of the big reasons for Modern Apocrypha. If you haven't got a copy of Brightstar, or if you're interested in the anthology, head over to the website, e6universe.com. There'll be more info coming up on that. If you're not on my email list, you should be, because I'm sending out info as new stuff comes available or there's new information. I am really looking forward to getting this anthology done. I currently have a tie between John and Rachel and Kevin as being the subject of the final short story for the anthology. If you've read Brightstar and you'd like to weigh in on which character you want to see a short story written about, please drop me an email. I'd love to hear. I need a tiebreaker, so let me know what you think. And just thank you, everybody. I just really appreciate your support.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all the people enjoying Modern Apocrypha. As many of you can see, I'm an avid coffee drinker, and I've been drinking North Arrow coffee for a couple of pounds now. You can find North Arrow coffee at northarrowcoffee.co, all one word, where they list coffee of the month and how green coffee is handled. I've been enjoying some of the number 4 Honduras and some of the number 10 Peru, available at northarrow.co. If you'd like to help support us even more, you can use discount code E6 for 10% off your coffee order today. Thank you.
And we're back. So,
Welcome back, everyone.
we never actually said it, but it's obvious to anybody who's watching, you have a new background there.
Yeah, we've got an entire new office set up. My kiddos are of an age; they are starting to move into different rooms and out of the house entirely. This was the original kids' room when kids were newborns. Now cleaned up, repainted. We've got some cool paints just around to give it a nice outdoor feeling. I got a carpet that looks like grass. I've got my sound boards like the picture behind me and some six-sided hexes around to help absorb some of the sound reverberations throughout the room. It's got a lot of new lights in it to brighten up the room for recording. Yeah, the great workspace. We can take a quick start. I'll start stacking our books as we get our library built.
Yeah, no, I think it looks great, and I wanted to actually say something about it. I'm working on my studio. For anybody who doesn't know, I have a little sound studio I'm working on the other end of the basement. I'm hoping in the next few weeks that'll get to the point where I can use it too. It'd be nice to not have to interrupt my whole family's life just to record podcasts, because right now, to keep the sound level low enough, I have to keep everybody out of the basement and they have to be quiet upstairs, because there's no room in this house where I could record that's actually quiet right now. So, yeah. Anyhow, we were going to talk about segmented trust. And you want to define that for me real quick, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So what I mean when I say segmented trust is being both knowledgeable about your own preferences as you're looking at people and listening to people, but it's both finding someone that you might trust in one area. Say an older gentleman that's a father as you're a younger father, and he's got a large swath of useful information from the perspective of the head of a household, but he may not know anything about electronics. Right? He may not know anything about mechanics. So just that sort of concept to both feel out your correct comfort level for what you're asking, but don't trust the science just because it's the science.
Well, actually, you sort of hit both sides of this, right? Which is what I was about to do. On the one hand, people who have spent a great deal of time studying into something and learning about it and understanding it tend to have more knowledge of those things, right? That's just automatic. So if you want deep knowledge of something, going to someone who has studied it is a good idea. But the pitfall that you run into when you do that is a lot of times those people have taken into themselves the cultural wisdom or the sort of the tradition of that discipline, and made it a part of themselves at a level that makes them blind to the realities that are obvious to everyone else or obvious to those with a critical eye and just a decent bit of common sense. It's like when we look at biology, and I know we were going to talk about evolution, we'll have to get to that next episode or something, but when, say, you talk about biology, most of the people who study deeply into it hold to an evolutionary framework. And when you look at things in just a common sense way without knowing a whole lot about them, you wind up with a whole lot different perspective than the people who have gone into the minutia of something and have maybe accepted some pretty serious errors in their premises that lead them to wildly crazy understandings in the minutia. So when it comes to raising kids, or when it comes to medical stuff, or when it comes to you name it, when we as regular people look at those disciplines, we go, there's probably something to a lot of what they say, but there are also things about this that just don't make sense. And that's why when guys like Obama get up and say, oh, I wish I could just run the whole country with experts, I'm like, no, there's a reason we don't have experts running the whole country. It's because I wouldn't want those experts running my life. It's my judgment that runs my life, and that's important because I get to live with the consequences of that. So it is important to have the perspectives of people who dig deep into something, but it's also important to have our own common sense understanding of things and to form our own opinions.
Yeah, I find that it's often helpful to look at it, whatever the topic may be, whatever the conversationalist that I'm, going through the topic with, to try to build some foundations to try to get where they're coming from. I find as the brunette between two blondes in my life, I'm often the translator for people. And so people think they're saying one thing when they're saying another. And so I spend some time getting to their definitions and getting to a space there. But one of the things that I most look for is someone that will say, here's the core of how I believe it. Here's the left of that, the right of that, the top of that, bottom of that, the light of it, the dark of it. However, here's some, I hate to use the word spectrum, but it is what it is, but some spectrum of fact that for some people, this is the way it goes. For some people, this is the way it goes. On average, this is what we say, but that's not specific to an individual, right? So those in-depth answers, not a simple dogmatic answer, is often in and of itself enough for me to examine and say, okay, that's a great way to look at it. And my word for that means the same thing that I say it this way, right? And so we can get to the same image, right? If we're both describing the scene, we can both take the language and get to the same image in our mind, an image on the canvas, without worrying so much about how we describe or, the exact verbiage of that often hits that someone thinks they're saying something that they're not exactly saying. So here's a perfect example, and it kind of flows into our next discussion. I really do want to bring up evolution because it's a current topic in the metasphere. But
Well, let's hit that in another episode because I want to take a whole episode to hit that.
Totally. But here's this to help you with the idea of good in a space, but not good all the time. Newtonian geometry, right? Newtonian physics is good on a flat plane. We assume a flat plane when we're building a building or something smaller than a square mile, because you can effectively work in a flat space, even though we're on a sphere. And it works good enough, but it's not good enough to explain all of everything in every scale. It's only useful when you're really close and so it is true. It is useful. It's not true. Like transcendentally true. It's not transcendentally
right.
true.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you.
Right. And so a lot of people, no matter how much you are diving with the conversation or whatnot, feel like they've got transcendental truth when they may have specific localized truth. So feeling that out for yourself is where the common man beats out the expert, because we feel out the overall, tapestry of everything, because we don't see the individual high resolution bits just because we're not specialists. And so if you here recently, we just were working in your space, getting some putty up on the wall to make it look matching but not the same with the texture on the wall. If you were to zoom up very close to the textures on the wall, it looks like a texture. But then you zoom up to the full wall, does it look like it matches the rest of the textures? Is that right? There's more in the broader context.
Right.
But the fine context obviously is necessary because it does provide insights that are necessary as well. So it's not like either one is not going to be necessary, but if you ignore the zoom out, then you will often have a perfect puzzle piece, just not in the right place.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on this topic as far as it goes. I think we've kind of reached the end of where my brain goes with it.
Well, and I would just say that I would never discourage someone from facing the problem. Jordan Peterson, face this thing. Listen to everyone. That doesn't mean that you offhand believe everyone, even if you believe them in the context of what they were saying previously. Again, listen to things like listen to. It takes years. It takes years to really trust someone outside of yourself, to where if you came to me and said XYZ is happening over here, show up, and I wouldn't even think. I'd say, okay, my brother in Christ has heard something, and we're going over here.
Right, exactly. Well, and it's it's the same way, right? It's like, yeah, that personal trust is based on relationship more than it is on blind trust in someone's position as an expert. And it probably should be in most areas. It's like the whole do you trust the doctors thing, and that's a tough one because in our society there are certain experts, like medical experts, who seem to think that when you put yourself in their care, they have every right to do whatever they want with you. Where the reality is, we still have a responsibility, even in those circumstances, to make our own decisions for ourselves, with their advice. But man, then you find out what I've been learning over the past 10 years about doctors and the way medicine is practiced, and it just changes your whole perspective on things. It's like that whole profession is based on some pretty seriously messed up preconceptions and premises that wind up causing really seriously bad fruit in certain areas. There are things they're good at, and then there are things they're really, really bad at. And they think they're good at both. So, yeah.
And in your segmented trust, just because you believe something and it is true doesn't make it true in every situation. This one strikes me as one of the secularist versus faithful arguments about is medicine good or bad, and all they throw out is germ theory versus spirit theory, that evil spirits make you ill versus germs make you ill, right? And that one single topic does not, across the board, I mean, just because germ theory and germs or viruses or bacteria are the thing that causes sickness, doesn't mean your spirituality will make you more or less resilient against them. It doesn't mean that believing that makes the particular drug of the day a correct fix for the ailment in front of you, right? A la ivermectin versus the shots. Right? There were other care that could have been useful, but it wasn't even allowable discussion because you've now become dogmatic about germ theory to then support things that germ theory would disprove, right? So that segmented trust, you can't just hang your hat on it and say it's great forever because the enemy is always trying to put what you mean when you say that. Not out of your mouth, but out of the ear of the
That's 100% right, and that's a great case in point for what we've been talking about. I look at, well, the way I would put it, the example I would use is, I've hurt myself pretty badly from time to time. I have, like, my finger here got absolutely torn up by a milling machine a few years ago, and I went to the hospital and they put it back together. They literally put the pieces back together, and it works. And I didn't lose the finger the way you would have a couple of 100 years ago, and that's amazing. That's great. They're actually really good at certain things. But then you look at the success rate of the medical profession on things like cancer. Well, when you start to learn about cancer and about what actually causes it, if you're eating right, most of the time you won't have a problem with cancer because you're eating the foods your body needs and you're not feeding things that you shouldn't be feeding in your body. You don't end up having a problem with cancer so much. The medical profession never even addresses that most of the time when it comes to cancer. You have to go to very specific places or people to even start to get a look at that. But it was known back in the 1950s that was the case. There was a guy who was curing cancer at incredibly high rates in the 1950s. People the doctors had totally given up on. He'd cure them and they'd go home and they'd be fine for 50 years because he changed their diets, changed the way they ate, changed their lifestyle enough that they were able to kick the cancer because it was what they were eating that was feeding the thing. They had gotten into an imbalance. And we've got a similar problem with things like diabetes, things like heart disease, where the cause of those is more holistic than anything else. And we try to medicate it with pharmacology. And there was somebody on Twitter who said something a couple of weeks ago that made me chuckle. He said, yeah, I don't consult pharmakia doctors who take oaths to Apollo. And I'm like, oh yeah, that is exactly what's going on there, isn't it? Pharmakia is the word for sorcery in the Bible. And it's a very similar sort of concept that we treat medicine today. That's what the Bible calls sorcery. That's kind of an eye-opening thing when you think about it. I don't know.
That is rather eye-opening. That's not a connection that I knew.
Yeah, well, and don't get me wrong, I'm super thankful. You know, this finger, like I say, the only option would once have been to cut it off. I'm super thankful for the medical system and what it can do, but we also have to be cognizant that it isn't perfect and that there are bad influences there that that well, they're under the influence of the enemy. The medical system is captured by the enemy more fully than about anything else in our society right now, near as I can tell.
It is certainly in a very dangerous place. I would compare it. I've seen some really tragic sports figures where they've gone to professional swimming, and in order to increase their speed, they've removed their arms. They've literally removed their arms so that they can swim faster. And you might wonder, is that really an overall benefit for this person? That no longer has surgically removed their arms so they can fly through the water. You have the same thing with, these inhibitors that prevent your mind from working the way it should, prevent you from having feelings that you should, prevent you from processing foods the way you should, right? It's literally cutting off a piece of you and acting like it's a pure benefit. And it's not a pure benefit. You're losing, literally cutting a piece of your body off with some of these procedures. I can't possibly see how, at least with transhumanism, the idea of us adding something extra, not just cutting off pieces. It's a
I
strange place
guess,
for
man.
you.
And that takes us to the whole what is it? The whole transgender thing, which is, I mean, I don't know. When people are at a point where they're willing to affirm someone's mental illness in order to make them feel better, to the point where they're willing to cut off a piece of them to affirm a mental illness and act as if that is going to be a positive thing for them. Anybody with common sense looks at that and goes, this is really screwed up stuff, man. And that's kind of the public
Well, if
looks
you
at what's
really
going
look at
on with
it,
that.
it's so much more painful than that. If you really look at it, it's so much more painful than that because the one side of it is they really dislike that sneaky men are sneaking their way into what sneaky men are sneaking their way into men's spaces, and having men sneak back into those spaces is not okay. At the same time, those people have no care for the children that are being mutilated. It's not about the children, it's about their loss of their college position, work position, sports position. Right? It's not, oh, these poor kids. That's not what I hear. I hear that from the Christian side. From the transgender side, it's how dare you let these genetic males into our female spaces because it's all about giving women everything. It's not a positive uh, perspective of the people doing it or fighting.
Yeah. Well, and even just in general, if I found myself in the position of one of those people, and these people who you trust to advise you well about your body and your health, which is one of the most important subjects, starts just telling you, "Oh yes," and they affirm your mental illness. They agree to your mental illness instead of saying, you know, this is actually something that you need to work through and deal with. You were born with the body you have, and it would not be helpful for you to mutilate yourself. That's just a tragedy all by itself. Just to start off, without even getting into the external effects. And that is where our medical profession, by and large, the fact that any of it can go there means that the whole thing is teetering on the edge of insanity. It's a symptom of a deranged system. It isn't that, oh, that part of the system is broken. The whole system is deranged for one part of it to be able to get that bad. It's, yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. It is very notable, though, that the thing that they're fighting is their loss of an advantage, not the detriment to the youth. Separate people do complain about the
Well,
detriment to the youth, but
yeah,
it's just oh, it's quite something. Quite
no, I'm with
something.
you. No, well, and along those lines, folks, if any of you folks have serious medical issues, doctors' opinions may be useful, but do your own research. Like you can't trust any expert class without verifying that you agree that in general they're headed in the right direction. Or you shouldn't. That's just your responsibility as a human, is to take your own life into your own hands and to do the things that are in your judgment best with it. That's like our function here. And so when we start outsourcing that to other people wholesale without bringing our judgment to bear on it, that's a pretty serious problem, and it leads us down pretty bad roads. One of the reasons that our society has deteriorated as far as it has, actually, is that we've allowed that to happen, where instead of viewing it as each individual has a responsibility to understand what he's doing with his life and to make good decisions for himself, we have outsourced a lot of that in a segmented trust fashion, which is why when you first explained to me what the concept was, I got this really kind of ugly feeling about it, where you have to admit that there is value to it. There is also this imbalance in our society where we've pushed way too much into that category and we have not taken personal responsibility for things. You can even see this in charity, for example. We have pushed charity into a government frame where the government is responsible for taking care of the people who can't take care of themselves. And people are viewed as crazy for seeing it in some other light, where the reality is the most effective way to do charity is to entrust the money to people who actually care about the individuals you're taking care of, who on a case by case basis go and become part of their lives and help them up out of their pit. That's why churches are the best, historically, are the best at raising people up out of bad situations. And when you start trying to offload that stuff on the government or try to, welfare or whatever it is, you wind up with really seriously bad fruit going on in those situations. It's just a fact. And it's another symptom of the same disease, right?
Right, right. And this is maybe a good way to help people understand where they fall in this. This is something that everybody, I'm hearing it said through religious and secular circles, just everybody's in this space at this moment where they are saying you cannot outsize, you cannot let anybody else do your thing, right? Whether that's an artificial intelligence system, whether that's the government, whether that's a school administration, you have to think for yourself. So if you are discussing and thinking and having fellowship, lots of ways to discuss thinking for yourself, then good. That's good. When you are asking so that you don't have to think, and all you're doing is just seeing what to say next, that's bad. It's pretty simple. If you're listening so that you can form your opinions, great. If you're listening so that you can gather your opinions, stop.
Well, and I guess the point there is just that each of us is responsible for constructing our own worldview from the ground up. This is not something where you can go borrow your parents' worldview or borrow your favorite politician's worldview or whatever and come out okay. You're going to wind up in trouble if you do that. You have to actually go and ask yourself what's important and build a worldview from the ground up. And very few people actually do that. Most people do exactly what you say. They're borrowing pieces of what they believe from other people instead of forming a worldview for themselves, and that's harmful. The best thing we can actually teach our kids is to form their own worldviews.
Well, and I would say that people are going to form their own worldview no matter what. But the problem is if you don't think it through, you're building a really piss poor one.
Yeah.
Right? If you just take everyone's
fair enough. However you want to
put
word
together
it.
something that doesn't. Yeah, you're not going to get away from
Right.
things. You're not
And
going
the
to get
point
away
I'm
from the
going
road.
to here, right, the point I'm making here is just that we, as people, we tend to reach out for people who we like the look of or who we trust, and we borrow their worldview wholesale in some sense, instead of actually going through each point and figuring out what we personally believe on that point and doing the work. And that's what I'm advocating, and that's what you're advocating. And actually, this is getting close to a good place to call it. Anything you want to add on here?
No, I would just say that it is not something that anybody does not do. Every single human being builds their own worldview, period. And your best bet is to not do it alone. Find your fellowship. Really don't be alone. That is one of the most dangerous places to be.
Yeah, I think we've both had some experience with that. I can agree. That's not a good place to be. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will catch you next time.
Next time, everyone. Thanks for coming by.